Boldwood presents Fury, written by Heather Atkinson and read by Angus King. Chapter 1. Virgil sat with his eyes closed and legs crossed, enjoying the warmth of the grass under him, the gentle sigh of the wind and the scent of wildflowers in the air. Peace reigned in his heart, and all was right with the world. He smiled as blissful thoughts filled his mind. The image of his bloodied fist pounding the face of his opponent smashed his sense of peace. The memory of the coppery stench of blood and the feel of the man's bones disintegrating beneath the blows irradiating his calm. Virgil's large scarred hands formed into fists, the veins popping out in his arms as the excitement of the violence rose to claim him once again. "Breathe," he murmured to himself. "Just breathe." After a few slow, deep inhalations, the violent images vanished and his body relaxed. The serene smile returned to his lips. "Hey, Virg," called a voice. Virgil sighed as the sense of serenity vanished entirely. Turning, he saw his next-door neighbour Cecil approaching. The man was tall, thin, and slightly stooped. The white vest he wore was a little too large for him and hung low, revealing his pale, scrawny chest covered in thick grey hair. He also wore cargo shorts, his skinny legs sticking out the bottom. Cecil's face was long and sad-looking, like a basset hound, and his grey hair was shaggy and unkempt. "How are you finding my breathing technique?" Cecil asked him, in his slow, languid way. "Aye, great," replied Virgil. "It helps me get back on track when the violent thoughts start intruding." "Glad to hear it," he said, unlocking the door of his caravan. "Want to join me for a wee smoke?" he added, referring to the marijuana he consumed on a daily basis. "Maybe later. I need a shower." "Aye, it's bloody hot today," said Cecil, squinting up at the sun before vanishing inside his caravan, letting the door bang shut noisily behind him. Virgil huffed with annoyance. Cecil was a good man, but he could be incredibly thoughtless. Fancy interrupting someone mid-meditation. Not so long ago he would have knocked Cecil out for that, but he was a new man now, living the quiet, violence-free life in the countryside. He rose and turned to face his own caravan, smiling fondly. It was only small but pretty. The top half neatly painted white, the lower half yellow. It even had its own garden with a small patch of lawn, colourful flowers, and a vegetable patch. His washing on the line to the right of the van waved in the warm, gentle breeze. The caravan might be small, but it was his haven, his retreat from the world, the place where he'd been reborn. No longer was Virgil MacGregor a bare-knuckle boxer and bodyguard for hire who revelled in carnage and violence. Now, he was all about calm and peace, and doing harm to no one. His happiness only increased as he stepped inside the caravan. The interior was as neat as the outside, everything freshly painted and clean. The kitchen tiny, but spotless. Best of all, it was his. Virgil's privacy was very important to him after growing up with 7 siblings. After enjoying a cool shower, he slipped on a pair of shorts and a black vest. He stared down at his stomach, his little paunch visible through the material. Once his stomach had been rock-hard and muscular, but that had meant an enormous amount of time spent at the gym. He'd rejected that way of life and now he had much more free time to do the things he actually loved. He hadn't let his boxing skills rust thanks to the punching bag around the back of the caravan. It kept his arms and shoulders in shape, and he did a lot of walking, but his stomach was a bit neglected. He had intended to start doing sit-ups again, but had been unable to find the enthusiasm. At first, his paunch had filled him with shame, but now it made him feel liberated. He'd broken free of the shallow expectations of society, and he liked it. It made him feel rebellious. Gone were his smart trousers and shirts, too. Now he perpetually lived in t-shirts, shorts, and jeans. Virgil stared at his reflection in the mirror hanging on the wall of his compact bedroom. The face that stared back at him had been called handsome many times, although he couldn't see it himself. His Italian heritage through his mother was strong. His hair was black, eyes dark, and skin olive. His height and strength had been inherited from his Glaswegian father, who had a fixation with the Wild West, particularly the Earp family. He'd been so obsessed with the history he'd named his children after all the Earp siblings, hence his own name, which had been the bane of his life at school, where he'd been constantly taunted by the nickname Virgil the Virgin. The taunts had stopped when he'd turned 15, shot up in height and breadth, and unleashed his frenzied temper, which had built up after years of bullying. He'd put his primary tormentor in hospital, and no one had messed with him ever again. It was hard to believe that it had only been 11 years ago. He felt to have lived a lifetime since. This hodgepodge heritage of Italian and Scottish with a dash of the American West had made Virgil feel like a bit of an odd mix. Neither one thing nor the other. The Earp names had been hard on most of his brothers. Their one sister, Adelia, had never gone through what he and his brothers Newton, Morgan, and Wyatt had at school. How they'd envied their younger brothers and sister their normal names. There were 2 years between each sibling, with Newton being the oldest. His parents had always been sticklers for punctuality. He wandered into the kitchen and made himself a cup of chamomile tea because it helped keep him relaxed. Just as he'd sat down at the small table to read his latest self-help book, his eyes settled on the photograph on the wall. It was of himself and his wife, Ember, whose fiery temper certainly lived up to her name. In the photo, they were on a beach in Cyprus, arms wrapped around each other. That had been in the days when they'd been happy. He loved that woman with all his heart. But two people with such volatile tempers should not be together. He learned that the hard way. Virgil sighed heavily at the sight of her brilliant green eyes and fiery red hair. Ember approached everything in life with great energy and determination, which was why it had hurt when she hadn't bothered to fight for him when he told her of his intention to leave the suburb of Gartharmlech northeast of Glasgow City where they'd been born and raised. She just coldly told him it was a good idea, that they both needed some space, before getting into a bright red sports car and driving off, leaving him standing alone and despairing on the pavement. That had been 6 months ago, and he hadn't heard from her since. Every day he expected divorce papers to land on his doormat, but so far it hadn't happened. So he'd been living as a married man without a wife. He wished he could move on and find someone else. But the irony was he couldn't bring himself to do it, even though the relationship had broken down. He'd always hoped she'd follow him, and that they'd be able to work out their relationship away from the pressures of home and their families, but she hadn't bothered, which told him it really was over. Just as Virgil returned his attention to his book, he heard a car door slam. He'd only had a total of 4 visits in the 6 months he'd been here, the majority of his family and friends deciding to give him the cold shoulder, considering him to be a traitor for putting his mental health first and leaving Gartharmlech. so he didn't think the visitors would be for him. But to his astonishment, he saw his mother, grandmother, and Ember getting out of the latter's bright red car. Virgil tossed the book onto the table and leapt to his feet, frantically looking around to ensure the place was straight, which it always was. He took great pride in his little home. Should he wait until they'd knocked or open the door anyway? Had they seen him peering out at them? God, he wasn't used to feeling so uncertain, but he hadn't seen them in months, and he knew all three would give him some pain for his so-called betrayal. Deciding it would be better to wait for them to knock, he was kept waiting when it didn't happen. Curious, he peeked out to see the three women he loved most in the world standing in a line, studying his caravan and garden. He pushed open the door and 2 pairs of dark eyes and 1 pair of bright green eyes snapped onto him. "Hello," he said. The 3 women frowned back at him. "So, this is your new home," said his grandmother, resting her large bulk on the walking stick she held in her big wrinkled hands. Even though she'd moved to Glasgow over 50 years ago, she had never lost her thick Italian accent. Despite his mother's inner strength and Ember's phenomenal temper, Ludovica was the scariest of the 3. "It is," he replied. "What do you think?" Ludovica nudged a pot plant with the toe of her thick, sensible shoe. "It has a little charm, although it looks very small." "It suits me well enough." Virgil was unable to keep his eyes off Ember. She wore one of her usual 1950s-style rockabilly dresses. This one was an off-the-shoulder number, black with red cherries. It should have clashed with her jaw-length red hair, but somehow it didn't. She wore one of her chunky beaded necklaces, this one green, and a matching bangle on her wrist. Those fascinating eyes of hers regarded him curiously. Maria, his mother, strode up to him and rested her hands on his shoulders. "I have missed you, son," she said. "Then why didn't you come out here before?" he replied. "I invited you often enough." His mother was a beautiful, regal woman who always held herself tall and proud. Her dark brown hair was streaked with grey and held back in a long plait. Her large dark eyes could be warm and full of love, or cold and hard, depending on her mood. In contrast to her mother's accent, Maria's was pure Glaswegian. "Let's talk inside," she said, glancing sideways at Cecil, who was watching them curiously through the window of the caravan next door while smoking a joint. Virgil nodded and led the 3 women inside. He refused to lose pride in his home when they regarded it with disdain. His grandmother banged her walking stick on the floor. The woman didn't need a stick to get around. She was sturdy and as strong as an ox, but she liked it, mainly because she could thump it off the ground when she wanted everyone's attention, or she could hit people with it. "You're needed back in Gartarmloch," announced Ludovica. "Your brothers are running riot." "That's hardly news, Nonna," he replied. "Our family isn't known as the Bloody MacGregors for nothing." "This is worse than usual. You'd think Nick being sent to prison for assault would knock some sense into their heads, but it hasn't. They're wilder than ever. You have to return and put them into order again." "If you can't control them, then what chance do I have?" "They listen to you, Virgil. They always have." "Can't you just put one of your curses on them? A couple of weeks with boils and sores will keep them too busy to cause trouble." "I never curse my own family, as you well know," she spat. "And where are your manners? You are raised to be a good host, or is there no room for politeness in this new life of yours?" "I take it that means you want a cup of tea, Nonna." Ludovica nodded and thumped her stick on the floor once more before taking a seat. "Ma?" he asked Maria. "Yes, please." Ember, he said, addressing her directly for the first time. His estranged wife just nodded, while continuing to regard him curiously. Virgil knew she was trying to work out whether he was a changed man, or still the husband she had once known. Virgil switched on the kettle and began preparing the mugs. So, what have my brothers been up to now? Morgan took on a bodyguarding job for Liam McNeil and he half killed one of Liam's own men, replied Maria. Good. Liam's a walloper. Why does he need a bodyguard when he has his own crew? Because there's a certain amount of kudos in having a MacGregor as a bodyguard, she replied with a proud tilt of the chin. Unfortunately, Liam's man was stupid enough to make fun of Morgan. Apparently he was jealous of his presence. So he got the hiding he deserved. I don't see what the problem is. It's only what I would have done. Aye, but you wouldn't have put him in intensive care. The police got involved. It was only thanks to the man refusing to talk that nothing happened. Then Wyatt and James got into a fight in a nightclub and practically smashed the place up, which cost our family more money, and Warren beat up 3 men in the Barbers. The Barbers? He frowned. Aye. One of them was Adelia's ex, and they made sexual comments about her in front of him. Even Newton, the most sensible one out of the lot of you, headbutted someone on the local bus for nicking his seat. They're out of control, and if you don't come back and sort them out, then they'll all end up in prison. So far, it's only the threat our name carries that meant that hasn't happened. But one day it will. I can feel it. Virgil sighed. You have to understand that I'm no the man I was. I took an oath of non-violence. His mother arched a thin, perfectly plucked eyebrow, while his grandmother raised both of her thick, bushy brows. Ember continued to regard him with that detached curiosity. Non-violence? Repeated Maria. Aye. I've done a lot of deep inner work these past few months to control my temper. It doesn't overwhelm me anymore, and it's brought an amazing sense of peace into my life that I don't want to lose, which I will if I go back to Gartharmlech. I'll be sucked back into my old ways, and I don't know if I'll ever find my way back to peace again. Your brothers need you, and you're refusing to help, demanded Maria, anger glittering in her eyes. I want to help them, of course, but I don't think I'm the right person to do it. Maria opened her mouth to yell back at him, but Ember got there first. So, how'd you spend your days here? She said. Virgil smiled, glad she was taking an interest in his new life, which was more than his mother and grandmother had done. I like going for hikes, he said. There are some beautiful woodland walks around here. I'll meditate, read, and I've got a job as a guide at the whiskey distillery down the road. It's really interesting. I meet people from all over the world. I bet you enjoy the free whiskey too? Maria frowned. No, I don't drink anymore and I quit smoking too. Neither do I eat meat. Ludovica slammed her stick on the floor so hard Virgil winced, afraid she would put a hole right through it. The woman might be in her mid-70s, but she was freakishly strong. What is this nonsense I hear? She barked. This family was raised on meat. What about my tagliata di manzo, or my porchetta? My beef braciole used to be your favourite meal. I'm not denying they're delicious, Nonna, he replied as he poured out the tea. But I don't want to consume the bodies of slaughtered innocents anymore. Slaughtered innocents. Oh, I see. You're on drugs, aren't you? I saw that scarecrow of a man in the caravan next door. Don't you think I know a joint when I see one? He's addled your brain with his dirty drugs. Virgil sighed inwardly, but he wasn't surprised. He'd always known they wouldn't understand. I don't take drugs. I don't take anything that doesn't enhance my body. Oh, aye, said Maria, as he carried the mugs over to the table and placed them before the women. Then how come you're carrying this tire if you're so health-conscious? She added, prodding him in the belly with her finger. Because I'm no slaving away in the gym 6 times a week and I'm much happier for it, he replied, placing a protective hand over his stomach. I'm still fit and healthy. A vegetarian in our family. Ludovica sighed and shook her big bull head. The shame. Virgil rolled his eyes and leant back against the kitchen counter, out of reach of her walking stick. He glanced at Ember, whose opinion he was most anxious about, but she continued to regard him with those curious green eyes. I have to admit that you do look healthy, said Maria. How can he be healthy without any meat inside him? Said Ludovica. He will soon start to fall apart. Meat is vital to our health. No, it's not, said Virgil. Nonsense, she snapped, banging her stick on the floor again. We're no here to discuss his diet, said Maria. Virgil, your family needs you to come home. So you ignore me for 6 months, practically disown me all because I wanted to better myself, and suddenly I've got to drop my new life at your command. I'm sorry, Ma, I love you. But don't you see how unfair that is? Where were you when I needed you? He yelled, dark eyes blazing. The 3 women smiled as the old rage consumed Virgil. He took several deep breaths, concentrating on the breathing techniques he'd learned, consigning that rage back to the shadows that lurked inside him. So, the old Virgil still lives, said Maria. He'd noted that their smiles were dark. They didn't want this new, kinder, peaceful Virgil, because he was no use to them. They wanted the hard, violent one, who would crush anyone who got in his way. He'd always known the 3 women in his life were wicked. That man's gone, he replied. My brothers are all adults. If they get themselves into trouble, that's their problem. The women's smiles dropped. We are MacGregors, hissed Maria, and MacGregors support each other. If that's true, then why did none of you support me in my new life? His mother just stared back at him, coldly. Your brothers have got back into the underground fighting scene, Ember told him. For Toni McVay. You're fucking kidding, he sighed, dragging his hands down his face. How the hell did that happen? I thought getting back into fights would allow them to channel their aggression, said Maria. I negotiated with Toni in exchange for helping out some of her people. Why would you want to do that when those fights were the reason that I came out here in the first place? I nearly killed someone, for Christ's sake. You weren't there, so I did what I had to do. The first fight is in 2 days' time, and I hope you'll be there to support them. Who's fighting? Morgan and Warren. Can you believe you've done this? You've made our family beholden to that psychotic bitch again. Why would she even let our family back in? She said we were ruining the odds because we always won our fights. Toni realised she had no choice if she wanted her people saving. What people? He exclaimed. It doesn't matter. It was just her latest gang war. She's always going through them. Anyway, she owes us, and letting your brothers back in the fights was the payment we demanded. No, something's no right. Toni was delighted when she managed to push us out of the underground fights. If she's let her family back in, then it's only because she's found a way to turn the situation to her advantage, which will hurt us. She knows better than to mess with us, hissed Maria. Toni McVay is scared of no one. She's the most powerful and dangerous woman in the whole of Scotland. Something bad is going to happen to Morgan and Warren. You have to pull them out of that fight. Impossible. It would hurt our reputation too much. Virgil groaned and screwed his right hand up into a fist, about to slam it down on the counter. It was only the gleam in the woman's eyes that stopped him from doing it. Don't you see that this fight is the real danger to our family? He said, voice low and controlled. It will let them get the violence out of their systems, said Ludovica. And that can only be to everyone's benefit. Are you going to come back to Gartharmlock then? Said Ember, with the same casual curiosity. I can't, he said, through gritted teeth. So be it, replied Maria. She got to her feet. We'll let you know how the boys get on. Virgil turned his back on them and placed his hands on the counter while he wrestled with himself. It would be easy for him to keep out of it and stay here, but he knew his brothers were walking into some sort of trap. Toni had lost a lot of money betting against his family, and she would want revenge, even if his brothers had helped out her people. Toni McVay was a very clever tactician, and she would have found some way to turn the situation in her favour. His mother was just as clever as Toni, though, and had decided to use this to lure him back home. Virgil turned back to face them, looking longingly around his little van before speaking. Fine, I'll come back, he sighed. Wonderful, Maria smiled. I knew you wouldn't let us down. But I want to make it clear that it's only temporary. This is my home now. Aye, of course, she replied dismissively. I mean it, Ma. I don't even know how much help I'll be. As I said, I've changed. No one ever really changes, said Ludovica. Deep down, they're always the same. No, me. I really am different. That remains to be seen. When will you return? Maria asked him. Tomorrow. I need to pack and let my job know. Very well. Your old room will be waiting for you. If you don't mind, Ember told the other women. I'd like a word with Virgil in private. Of course, said Maria. We'll wait for you in the car. Ember nodded and handed her the key. She didn't speak until Maria and Ludovica had left. Why don't you sit down, Virg? Ember told him. He nodded and took the chair opposite her at the table. We haven't talked, and we should have, she began. I considered driving out here to see you many times, but I thought I had no place in your new life. His expression softened. There will always be a place for you in my life, no matter what. I understood you came out here to fight your anger issues, and I didn't want to get in the way of that. My temper's just as bad as yours, and I thought I wouldn't help. Her green eyes narrowed suspiciously. Have you really got a handle on your temper? Aye, it's so much better. It doesn't rule me anymore. All because of meditation and chamomile tea? She said, gesturing to her mug. It helps keep me calm, he replied. You really don't want to come back to Gartharmlock, do you? No. I've made progress these last few months. I'm really no the man to put my brothers in line. Why can't Newton do it? He's the oldest, for God's sake. Because he's weird and introverted and he doesn't have your air of authority. The boys listen to you. They listen to Ma and Nonna. Maria's grip on them has been slipping lately. She knows she won't be able to control them for much longer, and Ludovica's getting on. She doesn't need this shite in her life. Come on, Ember. You know Nonna thrives on trouble. Besides, I've lost my air of authority. My brothers will see me as weak. Oh, I see, she said with an amused smile. See what? You're not afraid of being unable to control your brothers anymore. You're afraid of them taking the piss out of you. I am not. You can't fool me, Virg. I understand you far too well. You don't want to lose face in their eyes. It's nothing to be ashamed of. They've looked up to you your entire life. It's only natural that you don't want to lose that. All right. I admit it's true. But that's not my biggest worry. Then what is? Please talk to me. After all, I'm still your wife. You know what almost killing Mark Stewart did to me? I do. I nearly destroyed you. I'm terrified that if I come back, I'll lose control and do the same thing to someone else. Or maybe next time I'll go the whole way and take someone's life. That's my worst fear. She placed her hand over his. As you said, you're different now. You've got coping mechanisms you didn't have back then. Maybe you'll return to Gartharmlich and be stronger than ever. Maybe, he said, knowing it wasn't true. Your return means we need to discuss us. Do you still love me, Virg? Of course I do, he said, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. I'll always love you. I love you too. The question is, do we try again or get a divorce? The thought of divorce sent pain lancing through his entire body. I don't want a divorce. So you want to try and make it work? Aye, but we both know the old problems will still be there. I've had an idea. We could try couples counselling. You'd really do that? I think it's worth a shot. But you're always against therapy before. I've had time to think since you've been away. I've missed you, and if therapy could help us, then we should try it. That's if you agree. Absolutely I do. I've become a big believer in therapy lately. Great. I've found a good counsellor who comes highly recommended. I do think we should still live apart and not do anything physical. Let's just see how we get on first. Okay, he said, although he was disappointed. He hadn't had sex in 6 months, and he found Ember as desirable as ever. But it was worth it if it saved his marriage. I better go. Maria and Ludovica will be getting impatient, and it's not wise to keep women like them waiting. Ember got to her feet and rested her hand on his shoulder. I want things to work out for us, Virg. She bent over to kiss his neck. I still want you, she breathed in his ear. I've dated other men, but none of them can measure up to you. He was so enjoying her touch that it took him a moment to process what she'd said. What other men? He demanded. Ember just gave him an enigmatic smile before leaving. Wait, he called, leaping up. What other men? He rushed to the door, but she was already getting into the driver's seat of her car. As he ran outside, she started the engine and sped off, the wheels kicking up gravel, spraying his plants and vegetable garden like shrapnel. The thought of his wife with another man disturbed the calm balance of Virgil's mind. He picked up a plant pot containing a geranium he'd been nurturing and hurled it at the window of his caravan, smashing it. The sound of breaking glass brought him back to his senses, and he rushed inside to find the tender plant sprawled across the floor, soil and glass everywhere, the pot broken. He wasn't even back in Gartharmlich yet, and already the old shite was turning him back into the man he didn't want to be anymore. Now Ember had left, the spell she usually cast over him had gone, and he started to wonder why a woman like her would even suggest therapy in the first place. Was Ember really that willing to do anything to get their marriage back on track? Or did she have an ulterior motive? Virgil knelt beside the geranium, being careful to avoid the shards of glass and broken pot, and tenderly picked up the injured plant. I'm sorry, he breathed, shoulders sagging, not sure whether he was apologizing to the geranium or himself. Chapter 2. Virgil rose early the next morning and drove to the distillery where he worked. They'd been so good to him that he felt they deserved nothing less than an explanation in person as to why he wouldn't be in work for a while. They accepted his story of a sick family member without question, even sympathized with him, and told him his job would be kept open for him until his return, and that he wasn't to come back until he was ready. He felt horrible lying to these good people. but he could hardly tell them he was going to save his brothers from an underground boxing match run by the biggest gangster in the country. He then drove back to the caravan park and went to visit Cecil, who promised to look after his van for him, as well as his plants and vegetable garden, and to let in the glazier who was coming that afternoon to replace the broken window. It was only a 30-minute drive from Garthamlock, but events back home had a habit of tangling him up in their web. Although technically it wasn't far, it felt like a world away. After packing his bags, Virgil took one last lingering look around the caravan that had been his home for 6 months. He'd been so happy here, and had intended to make this place his permanent home. It had made him realise that he didn't need the big house, the designer clothes, or all the other crap he'd thought was important for so many years. This little nook was his haven, and his instinct was screaming at him not to leave it. With a regretful sigh, Virgil picked up his bags and carried them outside, pausing to check on the geranium he'd lovingly repotted. Thankfully, it didn't seem to be suffering from the violence inflicted on it, and stood tall and proud in the sun. He dumped the bags in the boot of his black 12-year-old Peugeot 208. His nearest neighbours had come out to wave him off, people he'd become close with in this small, peaceful community they'd created together. He felt choked up as he got in the driver's seat and started the engine. As Virgil drove away, he continually glanced in the rearview mirror, watching his little yellow and white van getting smaller, along with all those kind, happy faces until the scene vanished entirely, causing a pang in his chest. Swallowing down his emotion, he concentrated on what he was about to face. Already he knew it wasn't going to be pleasant. The first sign that Virgil was nearly home were the Garthamlock and Craig End water towers that looked like a couple of enormous grey UFOs with legs. The 3 terraced houses his family owned were just down the street from these towers, which dominated everything around them and gave the area a slightly claustrophobic atmosphere. His family's 3 houses sat together in a row. Initially, they'd only owned the house in the middle, but when the neighbours either side of them had got sick of their antics and put their homes up for sale, the MacGregors had purchased them, not wanting to leave the area where they'd lived for nearly 30 years. The fences and hedges dividing the front gardens of the 3 houses had been taken away, creating one long garden. The houses didn't have driveways, so he had to park at the curb at the end of a long line of cars. The majority of these motors belonged to his brothers, and were pretty high-end cars too. A BMW, 2 Audis, a Tesla Mark III and a Lexus. His own little car looked completely out of place. Virgil parked behind a white Audi A1 that he recognised as belonging to his younger brother Warren, and climbed out of the car. The front door of the middle house in which his mother and grandmother lived was opened, and out poured his brothers, loping towards him with big grins on their faces, looking like eager Labradors. Warren was the first to reach Virgil and threw his arms around him. "Ma said you were coming home today, but I didn't believe it until now," he said, slapping Virgil on the back before releasing him. "It's fucking great to see you again." "You too," replied Virgil, hoping he looked more enthusiastic than he felt. Morgan was the next to hug him, followed by twitchy, edgy Wyatt and then James. Only Newton remained in the garden, arms folded across his chest, looking his usual grim self. All the brothers closely resembled each other, their Italian heritage obvious. Their father had also been tall and strong, something all his boys had inherited. "So you're back?" Newton casually asked him. "Seems so," he replied. Virgil was close to all his brothers, except this one. Newton had always resented the influence he had over their siblings, especially as Virgil wasn't the eldest. In fact, James was older than Virgil too, but he never held any animosity against him as Newton had, accepting the fact that Virgil was a natural leader. James didn't want the hassle of trying to keep them all in line. Newton, however, was a different kettle of fish. There was something of the snob about him, and he'd always been cold and a little creepy. He was handsome and strong just like his brothers, but Newton's dark eyes were haughty and indifferent, lacking the fire his siblings possessed. "Ma said you were coming home, but I had my doubts," said Newton. "As you can see, she wasn't wrong," replied Virgil. "Is this a permanent return or just a temporary one?" "It's temporary. I intend to go back to Mulgai as soon as all this shite is sorted out." "What shite?" "The bare-knuckle boxing." "Don't tell me you're against it," said Morgan. "Let's discuss it inside," he replied, when he noticed one of the neighbours staring at him from their window. That particular neighbour wasn't at all afraid of any of the brothers, having got into scuffles with them several times. But he was terrified of Ludovica and her Italian folk magic and her curses. The men all piled into their mother's house where a feast awaited them in the kitchen, which was the heart of the house. Ludovica loved to cook. It was how she showed her love and spent the majority of her days. There was always something simmering on the stove or warming in the oven, and the house was perpetually filled with delicious aromas. The dining table groaned with a variety of dishes, all homemade and Italian. As with all the walls in the house, the ones in this room were covered in pictures and old photographs of the Wild West. Thanks to their father's fascination with the Arp family, the majority of them were various scenes from Tombstone in Arizona. Pride of place at the head of the room was an enlarged photograph of their father, Jimmy MacGregor, in his usual uniform of 10-gallon hat, blue jeans, cowboy boots, and blue denim jacket. He was standing outside the OK Corral, scene of the infamous shootout between Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan Earp, along with their ally Doc Holliday, against 5 members of a gang known as the Cowboys. Beside him in the picture was Maria, looking impossibly elegant and out of place. She looked radiantly happy wrapped in her husband's arms, pleased because he'd finally visited a place he'd wanted to see his entire life. Jimmy had died of a sudden heart attack 2 years after that photograph had been taken, which had been almost a year ago. "I knew you wouldn't let us down," Ludovica told Virgil with a rare smile, patting his cheek so hard it was almost a slap. She gestured to the table. "Sit, eat. You must be hungry." "It seems he's liking the food a bit too much," James grinned, prodding Virgil's stomach. "Piss off, you cheeky bastard." Virgil smiled back, smacking his hand away. The men ranged round the table, Newton being quick to take the chair at the head of the table, the one their father had occupied until his death. Virgil had to hide a smile. One such behaviour would have annoyed him, but now he just saw it as petty. "So, what's this I hear about you getting back into the underground fights?" said Virgil, plucking a piece of focaccia from a plate and tearing off a piece before popping it into his mouth. "It's great, isn't it?" Warren smiled. "Me and Morgan are fighting tomorrow night." "Do you know who your opponents are yet?" "Nope, but there'll be some big names there, men who we've never fought before, so hopefully we'll get to beat the living shite out of them and take their titles from them." "Toni McVay's running them." "Aye, we know. We helped save some of our people from a battering. Not that those people couldn't hold their own, but they were outnumbered at the time. The Savage Sisters from Hag Hill. You ever hear of them?" "No." "They're sexy as hell and hard as nails. I've been dating Rose, the youngest sister. Christ, she's something else." Warren cringed when his grandmother smacked him hard around the back of his head and began swearing at him in Italian for taking the Saviour's name in vain. Warren apologised in Italian. All the siblings had been taught from a young age to speak the language and were fluent in it. This heartfelt apology caused Ludovica to simmer down and lower her raised fist. "Can't I believe you went back into the fights after what happened to me," said Virgil. "We haven't forgotten," replied James, gently. How could we? We all saw how it affected you, but we don't lose it like you do in the ring. It's no just that, said Virgil, forcing down the traumatic memory of watching his opponent lying on the canvas bleeding from his mouth and nose, eyes rolling about in his skull while his wife screamed in horror beside her fallen husband. Toni didn't like us taking part in the fights because we always won and no one would bet against us. It ruined the odds for her. So why would she let you back in? Because we made a deal to protect our people. That's shite and you know it. Toni never does anything that isn't to her benefit. She's setting you up somehow, and I don't think you should go through with it. We've no choice. If we back out, then not only will we piss off Toni, but we'll look like cowards as well. Everyone will think we've lost our bottle. You know we have to go through with it, Virg. He sighed, the terrible feeling that his brother was right sinking over him like a 10-ton weight. This is such a mess. Perhaps if you'd been here then this wouldn't have happened, Maria told him as she joined her sons at the table. I had to leave, Ma, for my own sanity. You know that. You're a very strong man. You would have got through it with your family's support. Instead, you chose to run away. It wasn't a running away. I needed to get my head straight. To be fair, said James, we don't know what it's like to kill someone. I do, said Ludovica, savagely tearing a piece of ciabatta in two. The difference between his mother and grandmother had always been a startling contrast to Virgil. While Maria was tall, beautiful, and elegant, Ludovica looked like she could strangle pigs with her bare hands. Her features were fierce and coarse, her face heavily lined. Ludovica's body was very stout, although she was quite tall like Maria, which made her seem even more imposing. I don't think Virg is talking about your curses, Nonna, said James. Neither am I, she replied. His name was Matteo Barbieri, and he was my lover when I was a girl. He cheated on me with that slut Elena Amato, so I stabbed him in the belly with a pitchfork. Morgan spluttered into his glass of orange juice. A pitchfork? He gasped, wiping the spilt liquid from his chin. Yes, she said casually. He lived by some miracle. Believe me, that is not what I intended. Whenever he saw me coming after that, he would run away. I'm not surprised. Didn't you stab Elena too, Nonna? Said Warren. No, because she didn't promise to love me until the stars fell from the sky. Hey, that's a good line. I'll use that on Rose. You're in love, said Virgil with surprise. Aye, I think so. You'll understand when you meet her. There's no one else like her. Virgil danced across the table at Wyatt, who was quiet and sullen as always. He'd struggled from a young age with the pressure of being named after a legend. Are you involved in these fights too, Wyatt? I'm waiting to see how Morgan and Warren get on first, he muttered, which was his usual way of speaking. At least someone's being sensible about all this, Virgil told the table. Morgan rolled his eyes. Will you relax? Everything's fine. Your problem is you've been living the quiet life too long. You've lost your ball. The other brothers all regarded Virgil with wide, worried eyes. Just a few months ago, anyone accusing Virgil of losing his bottle would have been pulled to pieces. But now he just sat there, seemingly unaffected by the accusation. Their jaws all dropped open in astonishment, even Newton's. As you can see, I really have changed, said Virgil, with a touch of smugness. Just wait until you've been back here a week, replied Newton with a knowing look. Then we'll see the old Virgil again. I suppose you think getting back under Toni McVay's thumb is a good thing too, retorted Virgil. Like Wyatt, I'm waiting to see how tomorrow night goes. Everything will work out, said Morgan with his usual optimism. It always does. No for me, thanks, said Virgil, when James picked up the bottle of red wine that sat in the centre of the table and attempted to fill his empty wineglass with it. "I've given up the drink." They all gaped at him again. "You don't drink?" spluttered Warren. "Nope." "No even pints?" "No even pints, and I'm healthier than I've ever been." "If that's true, then how come you've got a gut on you?" said Warren. "You cheeky wee bastard, it's no a gut. I just stopped going to the gym and it's a big relief." "Ember won't like that stomach. She's no interested in any man who's no ripped." "I like to think that our marriage is based on something deeper than what each other's bellies look like," replied Virgil, while trying not to think about the dates Ember had said she'd been on. His brother could smell weakness a mile off, and if he found out, Newton would never let him live it down. "You might be worried, but she's no." "Don't worry about me and Ember. Worry about yourself. You're about to walk into Toni McVay's trap." "Who cares?" said Warren. "As long as I get to twat people, I'm happy." "She'll soon have you dancing to her tune just like all her other puppets." Morgan's expression darkened. "I'm no one's fucking puppet." "You will be by the end of tomorrow night." "No gonna happen." Virgil sighed. It had been pointless coming back here. His brothers had decided they were taking part in the fight, so nothing would change their minds. He recalled Ember's words and thought perhaps his return hadn't been a complete waste of time. It would be worth it if his marriage got back on track, but that would mean giving up his new life in Milgai. He still wasn't sure how he felt about that. "I hear you've been up to other stuff too," said Virgil, deciding it was time to move the conversation on from the underground fights. "Why did you beat up Adelia's ex?" he asked Warren. Their sister had moved away from Gartharmlech after their father had died, and now shared a flat with a friend in Edinburgh, wanting to escape her overprotective brothers. "Because the wanker started mouthing off about all the stuff they'd got up to in bed right in front of me. He thought it was funny because he had his pals with him. They got a good fucking twatting too." "Do you want to end up in prison like Nick? Because that's where you're going if you carry on down this path." There had never been an Earp brother named Nick. As there had only been 6 Earp brothers, Marie and Jimmy had named their 7th son after the Earp brothers' father, Nicholas. "I bet Rose wouldn't hang around waiting for you to be released," Newton told Warren. "She'd soon be after a new man." "What the fuck did you say?" he barked, shooting to his feet while Newton smirked back at him. "Sit down," Virgil told Warren. "He's only trying to wind you up." Warren glared at Newton before retaking his seat and stabbing angrily at his food with his fork. "You've all got to learn some self-control," Virgil told the table. "Coming from you?" replied Morgan. "Seriously?" "As I said, I've changed." "We'll see," said Newton. He leant back in his chair and clasped his hands behind his head. "We'll fucking see." After dinner, Virgil wanted to take a walk to exercise off the enormous amount of food he'd consumed. He'd missed his grandmother's amazing cooking. He also wanted to familiarise himself with the places again, as it felt like he'd been away a lot longer than 6 months. Virgil had intended to take the walk alone, but James and Wyatt insisted on accompanying him. Morgan and Warren were heading to the gym to get some practice in before their big fight, and Newton was working as a bodyguard to a local drug dealer on a neighbouring scheme. "Are you glad to be back?" James asked Virgil. Out of all his brothers, James was his favourite. He was the most sensible and down-to-earth of them all. Virgil had always thought he would be much better at keeping their brothers in line than himself, as James tackled situations with logic and reason, whereas Virgil went at them with anger and violence. But it did mean he was much more feared than his laid-back older brother. James had always refused to take on the responsibility, saying he was in charge of himself and no one else, which only went to prove how sensible he was. "It's great seeing you all again," replied Virgil. "But I miss my wee caravan and the peace and quiet of the countryside." "Have you really given up the drink?" "Aye." even though you were working at a distillery?
Yep.
So, what do you do for fun?
I read, meditate, go hiking.
I said fun, no punishment.
James grinned, wryly.
You do realise that you will turn back into the man you used to be if you hang around here for too long. Our younger brothers alone are enough to drive a saint to drink. Then there's Nonna cursing everyone left, right and centre. A Maud determined to do whatever it takes to earn some cash.
Aye, I know, but I've no choice.
You could go back to your caravan.
Virgil stopped and turned to face James. You really mean that?
Aye. Don't get me wrong. I love having you back. But I think for the first time in your life you're truly happy, and coming back here to all this shite will only ruin that.
Thanks, pal. I appreciate that, and I've got the horrible feeling you're right.
Virgil glanced at Wyatt, wondering what he thought about it all, but he just walked alongside them in silence. That was just Wyatt's way. He wasn't as vocal as his brothers.
Ma said Ember went to see you too?
Said James.
She did, and she wants to try couples counselling, replied Virgil.
Seriously? Ember wants to do that?
Why'd you look suspicious?
Because it doesn't sound like her at all.
Maybe she's changed too. Aye, all right, added Virgil at James's sceptical look.
You think she could have an ulterior motive? He said, curious to get a second opinion. He wasn't sure if he was being paranoid or not.
Maybe. This is Ember we're talking about after all, but you never know.
Unconsciously, Virgil had been wending his way towards the 3-bedroom house he and Ember had lived in together for the last 6 years, 2 of which they'd spent married. Most of the houses in Gartharmlech were pretty recent. The majority of the old dilapidated tenements in the area had been demolished in the 1980s and replaced with new builds. His and Ember's home was a rather elegant-looking 3-bed semi of red brick and white stone, complete with a 2-car drive and a decent-sized back garden. It was also on the opposite side of Gartharmlech to the rest of his family, something Ember had insisted on. Although she got on well with the MacGregors, she didn't want Maria and Ludovica coming round every 5 minutes to criticise her housekeeping skills, or Virgil's brothers turning up whenever they felt like it. Virgil had been in agreement with this, as he'd thought a little privacy from his overbearing family would help calm his and Ember's volatile relationship. But strangely, it had the opposite effect, and he'd never been able to work out why. He stared up at the house as he recalled the happy times he'd shared there with Ember.
Are you going to see her?
Wyatt asked Virgil.
No yet. Besides, don't think she's in. Her car's no on the drive.
Virgil's gaze turned wistful. Despite their unstable relationship, he and Ember had shared a lot of good times, many of them in that very house that he now felt cast out of. He got the feeling it would never be his home again. Chapter 3. The underground fights changed venue each time so the authorities couldn't catch up with them. The fight Morgan and Warren were participating in was being held at a fire station that had shut down a few years ago. Toni McVay had bought it intending to turn it into a pub, but instead she decided to use it for more nefarious purposes. A large boxing ring had been set up where the fire engines used to be housed, and already quite the crowd had assembled, word having got around that 2 members of the MacGregor family would be fighting that night. No one liked to bet against them, but they loved watching the sheer speed and savagery with which the brothers fought. Virgil arrived with James, Newton and Wyatt. Morgan and Warren were already present. Maria and Ludovica never came to these fights, so they'd remained at home. Everyone greeted the brothers cheerfully, shaking their hands and patting their shoulders. Such were their reputations for violence that no one would risk offending the brothers and becoming a victim of their retribution.
Wyatt, however, hated being touched. It made him twitchier than usual. One man who dared put his hand on his arm recoiled when Wyatt whipped round to face him, left eye frantically twitching, outrage written across his face. The man stammered an apology before melding into the crowd. They found their younger brothers loitering at the side of the ring. Warren had his arm slung around a very attractive woman in her late teens with long dark hair and large hazel eyes. Even though she looked completely out of place, she appeared to be relaxed and confident, not at all intimidated by some of the large, violent individuals in the room.
"I didn't know you were coming," Morgan told Virgil. "Seeing how you were so worried."
"I'm here because I am worried."